好，我们现在开始讲今天晚上的课。今天晚上的课就是一种空心的修法，也就是我们的无我的修法。
So the topic of tonight's teaching is emptiness meditation, and in tonight's teaching I'm going to introduce meditation on no self.
然后空心或者是无我，在这个佛教里面是一个非常非常重要的修法也就是空心，就是整个佛教的精华。
Emptiness or no self or not self in the Buddhist teachings is an extremely important teaching. It's in fact the essence of Buddhism.
然后这个修法呢主要就是因为我们的现在的所有的这些轮回当中的所有的痛苦烦恼都是来自于这个自我。
And the reason that we have this method of practice is that most of our suffering and affliction derives from self, a sense of clinging to self.
我们的这种对自我的这种执着这个在佛教里面就叫做我执。
The attachment that we have to self is referred to in Buddhism as self-attachment or self-clinging.
然后这个我执就是所有烦恼所有痛苦的源头。
And this self-attachment is the cause or the origin of all of our suffering and afflictions.
如果我们没有这种我执这样子的话，我们的所有的烦恼还有就是所有的痛苦都不会产生。
If we did not have this self-attachment or clinging, then we wouldn't give rise to all of our suffering and afflictions.
那么这样子的话，我们这个有必要修空心，用空心用无我这种修法来断除我们的所有的烦恼这是一个非常有效的方法。
So that's why it's necessary that we practice on emptiness and no self in order to eliminate our afflictions. This method of practice is an extremely effective one.
从另外一个角度讲的话比如说我们每一个人都有慈悲心，这个我们昨天也讲过了但是我们的慈悲心是非常的有局限性那这个局限性来自于什么呢？也是来自于这个自我。
So from another angle, we can say that as we looked at yesterday, everyone has compassion, but we spoke about how the compassion that every person has is to begin with limited, and the reason for this also derives from self-clinging.
这个自我我执它就像观鸟的这个笼子一样，因为我们的心就是受到了这个自我的这个约束这样子以后呢，然后他就把我们的心就是关在一个非常狭窄的这样子的这个空间，所以我们的心比如说我们心中的这个慈悲心这些都最后都变成这个很有局限性。
So this ego or self-attachment is like a cage that contains a bird. In this way, the ego serves to constrain or restrain our mind so that it is kept within a very narrow, small space. And due to this, our qualities such as compassion are very limited.
比如说一盏灯然后我们把这个一盏灯放在一个不透明的这个瓶子里面这样子的话， 这个光就只能就在这个瓶子的里面外面呢这个光是没有办法照亮。
It's just like if we put a lamp or a lantern inside an opaque glass bottle, the light would only be able to illuminate the inside of the bottle. It wouldn't be able to illuminate the space outside of it.
然后如果这个时候我们把这个外面的这个瓶子就是把它破碎这样子的话，那这个里面的这个灯光就是一下子可以照亮周围的所有一切。
If, however, we were to smash the bottle or the glass that contained the lamp, then immediately its light would illuminate the entire space.
同样的如果我们能够把这个我执断掉这样子的话，那我们的这个慈悲心一下子就是可以就把这些突破所有的这些局限一下子就可以让所有的众生都感觉到我们的这个慈悲心。
If we were able to eliminate our self-clinging, then our compassion would transcend all limitations, such that all sentient beings would be able to perceive this compassion.
然后有了这个我执以后呢，他平时都就很这个我们想做一件事情的时候他就经常就阻碍不让我们去做而且这些他不让我们去做的这些事情往往都是最有意义的最有意义最有价值这样子的事情。
And another thing is that this self-attachment or self-clinging, when we want to do something, it often prevents us from doing so. It prevents us from doing things. And in most cases, the things that it prevents us from doing are those things that are most meaningful and most valuable.
比如说我们有10个人就在一个沙漠里然后呢没有水那这样子的地方离水非常非常远这样子的地方然后呢我就有一瓶水然后我想这瓶水就分给大家我们一起喝这样子的时候我们的我执就出来，他就站出来说这个不能给这不能给，一定要给自己留下来一定要自己喝不允许分给大家他一定会告诉我们这样子。
If we imagine that 10 people were in a desert without any water at a place that was very far away from any water source, let's imagine that we had one bottle of water and thought to share it with everyone. At this moment, surely our self-attachment or self-clinging would speak up and tell us that we shouldn't do this, that we should keep the water for ourselves and that we shouldn't share it with anyone.
然后最后他不允许我把这瓶水分给大家，最后就自己喝了。最后自己喝了以后呢，当下虽然这个时候就给自己解渴了，但是呢这就变成了一辈子的内疚就是因为这么几个人都是好朋友然后呢我有一瓶水，这个就是我自己喝了，没有分给别人，那这个就是变成了一辈子的内疚。那么这个主要的是谁干的？就是我们的这个我执干的就是这样子很多很多的事情都是最有意义的这些事情，他就阻碍，他就不让我们去做。
So in this case, due to self-attachment, we drink the bottle of water ourselves. Our self-attachment, our self-clinging doesn't allow us to share it with anyone. And despite the fact that we quench our thirst this way, the fact that we didn't share the water with others turns into a lifelong regret, because the other people we were with were all good friends and we didn't share this water with them. So this is the result of self-clinging. It was self-clinging or self-attachment that caused us to behave in this way, and this is often the case with many situations in life. Often the most meaningful kinds of actions and undertakings, our self-clinging prevents us from doing.
然后比如说我们有几个人就是做成那个比较古老的这个简单的这个船大家做一艘这样子的简单的船然后就这个渡河这个时候比如说我想就是我们几个人当中的稍微比较弱一点的比如说年龄大一点的小孩等等我就是想把他们坐在比较安全的地方。那这个时候这个念头一起来的时候呢，然后我的这个我执立即就站出来说不允许最安全的地方一定要你自己做最安全的地方其他人不要管我一定要自己一定要坐在最安全的地方最后呢要把这个位置这个也就没办法给他们最后就自己上去坐在最安全的地方。
Or if we imagine that some people are crowded aboard a boat, an old-fashioned boat, and this boat is crossing the river. Let's just say that on the boat there are some old people and some young people, and one thinks to make sure that they have a safe seat on the boat. As soon as this kind of thought arises, immediately one's self-attachment or self-clinging will kick into action and will tell oneself that no, one shouldn't do this, one should take the safest seat for oneself, and one shouldn't pay attention to others. And so due to this, then one takes the safest seat for oneself.
最简单的比如说我们10个人或者几个人就是睡在一个房间，然后这个房间就因为外面下雨漏水只有一个地方是不漏水的那这个时候呢我想这个不漏水的这个地方呢让其他人稍微弱一点的人去睡我就睡在这个漏水的地方没关系我可以但是这个时候由我们的这个我执出来站起来说这个地方这个不能让给别人这个地方一定要我自己睡其他人让他们到这漏水的地方去睡这地方一定要我自己睡最后呢这个事情有做不成。
Or perhaps the simplest example is 10 people in a room, it's raining outside, it's leaking everywhere in the room except for one place. There's only one dry place. And let's just say that as soon as the thought arises to let the weaker members of the party sleep in the dry place, one's self-clinging or self-attachment immediately says, no, you can't do this, you should take this dry place for yourself and let the others sleep in the wet places.
还有就是我们前几天讲的比如说有人说我们长得不帅不漂亮说我们长得丑这个时候呢然后我们马上就会生气其实这个我们前几天讲过比如说他说的是我们的肉体肉体他是无所谓他根本就不会生气的然后呢我们的意识呢他根本就没有说你的意识这个长得怎么样丑不丑他根本就没有讲但是呢这是我就生气了这个生气的主要的原因是什么呢又是这个跟我这个我执有关系本来就是如果我们按理来讲他说的是肉体但是肉体他不会生气的然后呢他没有说我精神但是精神就生气了就是这样子很多很多的时候就根本就不需要生气不需要产生这些烦恼经常都产生这样子的烦恼那么这些烦恼它是 为什么呢？我们刚才讲，明明知道他说的是肉体啊，肉体不生气，然后我们明明知道这个我们生气的是我的精神啊，但是他根本没有说我精神啊长得丑啊，那为什么呢？有是跟这个我执有关系。
Or as we talked about a few days ago, let's say someone insults our appearance, says that we're ugly or unpleasant looking, we get angry, but of course the person has insulted our physical body, they haven't insulted our minds, and yet nevertheless it is our mind that gets angry. And the reason it does is connected to self-attachment. In fact, in many cases it's like this. There's no need for us to get angry or to give rise to afflictions, but we do. So in this situation, again, our physical body is being insulted, not our mind, and yet our mind gets angry.
所以我们每一次我们想做一点有意义的事情的时候，然后这个我执就出来阻碍我们。
So every time we get the thought to do some kind of meaningful action, this self-attachment speaks up and prevents us from doing so.
我们在这个轮回当中这么长的时间到现在为止，就是一无所有我们这一次如果没有学佛的话，我们离开这个世界的时候，这个我们前几天也讲过，我们的所有的东西都要归零什么都带不走，属于自己的东西一点都没有那么这个为什么变成这样子呢？为什么我们每一次都走的时候要归零呢？也就是因为这个我执因为它不让我们去做这些有意义的事情所以我们最后走的时候呢，就是一无所有。
And because we've been cycling for such a long period of time in samsara up until the present day, if in this life we hadn't or don't study Buddhism, then when we reach the end of our life, we will be returning to zero with, as we spoke about yesterday, nothing for ourselves, nothing that really belongs to ourselves. And the reason that at the end of each life we return to zero with nothing is because of self-clinging.
然后这些所有的这些幸福快乐，还有就是比如说像福报功德这些都是来自于我们为别人着想也就是来自于这个慈悲心但是我们的我执跟慈悲心就是对立的，我们的我执跟我们的无物自私的这个奉献对峙感这是对立的只要有这个我执爱我执，然后我们就没有无自私的奉献这个我执它越强大，我们就越自私然后我们变得越自私然后我们越就不能做有意义的事情这一辈子这一生当中帮助对自己有利的事情，下一世对自己有利的福报，这些都做不成。
And all the happiness that we enjoy, whether it be good fortune or positive karma, this all derives from caring for others, derives from compassion. So self-attachment or self-clinging exists in opposition or contradiction to compassion and selfless giving. So long as we have self-attachment and self-clinging, then there can be no selfless giving. The stronger our self-attachment is, the more selfish we are. And the more selfish we are, the less we have an ability to really undertake acts that are meaningful in this life too, acts that are meaningful and beneficial, and in the next life as well.
最后我们这样子去思考分析了以后呢，就发现这个我执跟我的所有的烦恼还有就是所有的追果 都有关系，它就是这一切的这个来源所以就发现了这个问题以后呢，佛教就是首先我们要把这个我执给端掉端掉了以后呢，然后我们可以做很多的随时都可以做很多有意义的事情所以把我们的心从这个我执当中解放出来这叫做解脱，这个是大乘佛教或者小乘佛教都觉得这个非常重要。
So if we contemplate this carefully, we can recognize that self-clinging is the root of all of our afflictions and negative karmic actions, that it is the origin of all of these. Once we discover this, then it becomes necessary. Buddhism urges us to eliminate our self-attachment, and after we have done this, it will then be possible for us to do all kinds of meaningful actions. So this free the mind from self-clinging is what is referred to in Buddhism as liberation. This is regarded as extremely important in the Mahayana and the Buddhist teachings in general.
然后我们就是对我们的这个身体和我们的精神的这个组合了以后呢，最后就变成了人。那我们对这个人的这种态度过去呢，我们一直把它当作是自我我们认为它是我。然后呢，那现在就是有换一个角度去思考，它到底是不是我除了这个肉体跟精神，还有没有一个自我的存在这样子开始分析，然后就把这个我执断掉。
So it's through a composition of a physical body and a mind that we have a human. But what we need to do now is, and the attitude that we have had in the past is that these two things together is our self. What we need to do now, though, is to try to change a perspective and to ask ourselves, is this really me? Beyond my body and mind, is there something that is really me, myself? And in analyzing, investigating in this way, we need to eliminate our self-clinging.
然后我们就把这个我执断掉了以后呢，一样的可以生活一样的可以工作。但是我们可以做更多的最有意义的事情。
And when we've eliminated self-clinging, we still can continue to live our lives, do our work. However, we will be able to do more meaningful things.
从我们的心中就把这个我执就驱除把它赶出去但是实际上我们这个生活工作以及就是修心上面把这个我执驱出去了以后呢，不缺乏任何东西没有缺少任何的东西，就可以没有它以后呢，对我们没有任何的损失。
So in removing self-clinging from our mind, then we continue to live our lives, we continue to do our work, notwithstanding or even though we have removed or eliminated our self-attachment, we've not lost anything. This doesn't constitute any kind of loss.
虽然这个自我它是无数的罪过和烦恼的来源但是如果它是一个存在的东西，它是一个真实的东西的话，那我们也没有办法否定它的存在，也没有办法否定它的真实性。
Even though the self is the cause of countless afflictions and negative karmic actions, if it were really real, if it were truly existent, then we wouldn't be able to negate it.
比如说我们的我执就是从某一个角度去看上去它就是一个真实的，它就是一个真实的这个存在的。但是如果从另外一个角度去一看原来根本就不存在的东西，它就是根本就不是一个真实的东西。那这样子的话，我们应该换一个这个角度去看它。
So from one perspective, we can say that our self does really exist. However, from another perspective, we can say that it does not really exist at all. So really what we need to do is to change a perspective or change the perspective that we look on the self from.
那么我们现在就是要有一个非常这个准确的一个这样子的逻辑去观察它是不是存在，它是不是真实存在的。
So what we need to do is to apply a very correct manner of reasoning to test whether or not the self is truly existent.
首先我们要知道这个佛教讲的空性和无我是不是所有的佛教徒都要去修或者是不是任何一个时候都需要用它来解决我们的烦恼不是这样子，不是所有人要去修想修可以修然后呢也不是所有的烦恼都用这个方法来解决当然这个方法是可以解决所有烦恼的根但如果我们暂时不想断除它的根，只是想暂时控制一下，临时控制一下的话，那就用不上这个空性可以不用，可以不需要用这么深的东西。
So first of all, we need to look at the Buddhist practice of emptiness and practices of no self. Is it the case that these are practices that all Buddhists need to do? And is it the case that we should rely on these methods for resolving all our problems? The answer to both of these questions is no. If meditating on emptiness and no self is something that you want to do, you can. At the same time, emptiness and no self are not necessarily, they don't have to be the methods that we use to address all of our issues, even though these practices, these methods are capable of eliminating all of our suffering at the root. If we are not interested in doing this, if what we are seeking is not a complete elimination of suffering at the root, but rather a temporary control of suffering, then it's not necessary for us to practice methods that are as deep as this.
首先我们对这个自我的这个认知就是一个非常的盲目的情况下产生的。到现在为止我们的概念当中的这个自我是一个非常非常模糊的概念根本就没有一个具体的东西，这是一种抽象的概念，而且这个抽象的概念如果我们就不思考这些问题的话它显得非常的真实但是如果我们静下心来就去思考一下到底什么是自我，这样子的时候就是越观察越模糊越思考越模糊，最后根本就不知道到底什么是自我。
Our understanding of what the self is a relatively blind understanding. Up until the present time, our understanding or conceptualization of self is very blurry and imprecise. In fact, our notion of self is a very abstract one. If we don't contemplate it, it seems to exist, it seems real. But however, if we think about it more deeply, if we contemplate it, then in fact this concept of self becomes even more blurry and unclear until we finally end up wondering, what is this self?
大家要动动脑筋去思考一下，这个是一个非常有意义的事情而且对我们来说是一个非常重要的事情这个就除了佛以外，科学家、哲学家，任何一个人都没有发现这个问题那这个问题呢我们现在自己去通过这个佛的这种思维的方式去思考的时候，立即就会发现非常的容易，一点都不模糊原来这是真的是它是一个抽象的概念，根本就这个所谓的自我根本不是一个具体的东西，没有一个具体东西，我们很容易一下子就会发现所以这个是一个对我们的生命当中就是一个非常有意义的事情，因为对这个是对自我的认知我们对外面的物质很多东西都是很了解的，但是我们对自我的这种概念是非常模糊，不知道自己是什么，所以这个一观察的话就我们立即就会发现它的真相。
So this is something that everyone should think about deeply for themselves, and by doing so, you'll inevitably and very quickly discover that in fact this concept of self is extremely abstract. To think about this is something that's very important for all of us. This question is something that, aside from the Buddha, scientists, philosophers, they didn't discover. But by applying Buddhist modes of reasoning, we'll be able to discover very easily and very quickly for ourselves the abstract nature of this notion of self, that is, the fact that its lack of a concrete nature. Usually we have a very good understanding about external things, material things, but no understanding really about this question. So, however, by thinking about it, by applying some reasoning, we will immediately and easily discover the truth.
这个问题我们就很容易发现比如说我们平时我们在日常生活当中我们会说我的身体然后就是我的头、我的手、我的腿、我的大脑，然后就我的心脏等等等等，这样子我们身上的里里外外的东西都可以这么描述。我的眼睛然后呢包括比如说大脑、心脏这些人的身上的这些关键的这些都可以这么说，都是我的我的可以加一个这样子。那么我的是什么意思呢？凡是可以加这个我的这样子的东西都是跟我有关系的东西，根本是不是我我根本不可能说我的这个任何人都没办法这样子描述这个表达是错误的。凡是说可以讲我的这样子的东西呢，就是属于我的，这东西就是我的东西，属于我的，我所拥有的这样子的意思。但是我自己呢不能说是我的我也是我的，这个是说不通的。首先我们去想一想这个日常生活当中是这样子。
This is something that we really can easily discover for ourselves. In our everyday lives, we always talk about my body or my leg, my brain, my heart, all the different parts of our body, inside and outside, we refer to with this qualifier, possessive, my brain, my heart, and so forth. Any object or any part of ourselves that we can describe with this possessive my is something then that is connected to me but not me. My implies that it belongs to me, that I possess it, that I have it. But it's not possible for us to say mine, self. That doesn't make sense. So this is something that we need to understand very clearly.
好，这样子我们进一步的观察啊，比如说，那么大脑啊，这个心脏，还有所有的这些我们身上的一切，包括我们的这个情绪，每一个念头啊，都叫做我的，都可以说可以这样表达，都是我的啊。那么这些都是你的啊，既然是你的，这就说明不是你了，那肯定是不是你了啊。那么这些东西都分开了以后呢啊。那么你在哪里呢？啊，什么是你呢？大脑不是你就是你的啊，心脏也不是你就是你的啊，然后呢，身上的全部的东西都不是你，都是你的啊，都不是你了，不是你自己，是你的东西啊。然后我们的意识啊、精神、情绪这些也是你的啊，那这些都是你的，那也就不是你了。那么这样子就是你在哪里，你是什么啊？这样子以后呢，我们都不知道我自己是什么了。
And so if we reason in this way, we can say that my brain, my heart, everything, including our moods, our every thought, we use this word my to describe. And if we do so, if it belongs to us, then it can't be us. If it is mine, then it cannot be me. Because when we separate all of these things out, then where am I ultimately? Where are you ultimately? If you're not your brain, if you're not your heart, then what are you? So we use this word my to describe all the various parts of our body. We talk about my mind, my consciousness, my emotions. If all of these things belong to me but are not me, then where am I? And in reasoning in this way, we will find that we don't know.
然后我们的这个我本身它自己就是一个非常混乱的概念，根本没有一个固定的这个观点啊。比如说刚才说我的腿啊，这个时候呢它不是我了，我们可以说它是我的而不是我啊。那然后比如说我们腿疼的时候我们的腿疼的时候呢，然后又会说我很疼我很疼那这个时候呢又把腿就当作我了我们会说我很疼哪里疼呢？腿疼那这个时候呢就说我很疼然后呢有些时候呢又说我的腿那这个时候呢又不是我了然后腿疼的时候呢说我疼那个时候呢又变成这个我的这个呢又变成了我了有些时候呢这个我又变成了我的那到底是你的还是你呢这个没有一个这个没有一个这样子的固定的这就是一个非常模糊混乱的抽象，就是一个抽象所谓的我就是一种抽象的概念。
So this notion of me, or this notion of self, is one that is very fluid. It's one that's very erratic. It's not stable. So when we talk about my leg, what is implied here is that my leg is not me, that it belongs to me, but it's not me. Sometimes, though, we mix this together. So we talk, let's just say that our leg hurts. Sometimes we say, oh, I hurt. And so in this situation, we conflate our leg with us. We conflate the leg with the self. So if someone were to say, oh, where do you hurt? We'd say, oh, my leg hurts. And then all of a sudden again, we would be separating the leg from ourselves. So sometimes when the leg is the self, sometimes it is something that belongs to the self. So we can see in this way that concepts of self are not fixed. They're abstract, arbitrary concepts.
然后我们进一步的在观察的时候，然后我们越观察就越能够发现这个自我确实是一个不存在的 这是一个我们自己想象当中的一个概念而已。
And so by analyzing it even one step deeper, we will discover that this so-called self doesn't really exist, that in actual fact it's just an imagined concept.
好，这个明白了以后呢，我们开始这个打坐去思考打坐去思考。那思考的时候，首先我们对我们的身体进行观察。进行观察，那么我们的这个肉体上有没有这个自我的存在，要这样子来观察，然后我们再进一步的观察我们的精神我们的这个意识情绪那这个上面或者这个当中有没有一个自我的存在这样的观察，如果这两边都没有找到一个自我合理的这样子的存在的这个自我，这样子的话，我们的身世，我们的这个一个人除了意识和肉体还有什么呢？没有别的了。如果这两个都不是自我的话，那真的是不知道这个自我到底是什么这个就是一个非常准确的一个逻辑的思考这里面没有任何的教条没有说因为释迦牟尼佛这么讲，所以我们要这么去相信所以我们要这么去讲，没有这样。你用什么样的逻辑用什么样的思维的方式都可以这是一个。另外第二个，这里面没有任何的信仰的成分这并不是说因为佛这么说，所以我们要去这么去信没有，你可以不信你完全可以得到一个另外的结论完全是可以，但能不能得到其他的结论，这个就要看我们去观察的结果所以这一个是佛教讲的这个悟空性真的是一个非常有意义的事情。
So in understanding this, we should begin our contemplation, to begin our contemplative meditation. And during this meditation, what we do is observe or investigate our bodies. We first start off with our physical body, and we ask the question as to whether it's possible to locate a self in our physical body. Then we move on to our minds, our consciousnesses, our emotions, and so on, and ask whether or not it's possible to locate a self amidst these. And if through our investigation we are unable to locate a self, a legitimately existing self in our physical bodies or in our minds, then we have to ask, well, besides the mind and body, then what else are we? If neither of these are self, then what is the self? Where is the self? This approach or this method of logical reasoning is one that is a very correct approach. It's not dogmatic. We're not saying here that we have to do this because this is what the Buddha said, or we have to believe this because this is what the Buddha said. At the same time, it's not predicated on faith. It's not premised on faith. There's no, ultimately, it's an application of reason. And anyone can do this reason, and they are free to arrive at a different conclusion. However, whether or not they would arrive at a different conclusion, we'd have to wait until they do the reasoning. So no self and emptiness are very meaningful aspects or components of the Buddha's teachings.
然后我们一个人的身体的基本的这个单位就是细胞。
The most basic physical unit of the human body are cells.
然后我们的这个身体一个人的身体有40万亿到60万亿的这个细胞有这么多的细胞构成的也就是说我们的这个身体除了这些细胞以外是没有什么所谓的身体。
And this physical body of ours is made up of a vast number of cells. I can't say in English this number of cells that Khenpo just said in Chinese. It is, I think, 4 with something like 12 zeros after it, to 6 with 12 zeros after it. So what Khenpo said was that besides these cells, there is nothing else. That besides cells, we are nothing else.
比如说我们在沙滩上把很多的沙子堆积起来做一个人的身体那样子，或者是像一个某一种建筑物比如说佛塔、佛像，或者是普通的建筑物。那从远远的看就像个建筑物，就是一个整体的一个建筑物但是实际上这个建筑物除了这个一粒一粒的沙子以外这里没有任何的其他的建筑物。其实这个建筑物就是一个无数的这个沙子堆积在一起同样的，我们的这个人的身体除了细胞没有别的东西，就是无数个细胞堆积一起然后像我们的肉眼这么非常非常这个迟钝的感官去看的时候，然后全部都变成了模糊了，然后就变成在我们的眼里它就像个人的身体。
So we can say that it's like at the beach, if we were to pile up a heap of sand and to make, say, a human body or a sandcastle, a building or a stupa or something like this. When we look at it from afar, it seems like it is a whole building or a whole structure. But in actual fact, it is nothing besides from countless grains of sand piled up and compacted together. And so too it is with the human body. In actual fact, our human body is comprised of a countless number of cells. However, when looked at, when viewed with the very limited sensory faculty of our eyes, it appears to take the form of a whole intact body.
如果这些细胞我们再把它分解的话，那最后就是变成了这个分子原子了但是呢，现在是不需要去想那么这个深就到了这个细胞就可以了。那么我们可以大家看看那个细胞的照片它像一个什么样的东西，它长什么样的东西那么这细胞我们怎么也想不明白这个细胞是我这就是它就像一个城堡一样的。你看看这个里面的结构它们的这些功能大家去看看，这根本我们怎么也想不明白它就是我。但如果它不是我的话，那么也没有别的了，就是这些。
Of course, if we were to divide cells down even further, we'd get atoms and molecules, but it's not necessary for us to go that far. We can just keep with the level of cells. Let's just say that we were to look at a photo of cells, to take a look what they looked like. We would never think, looking at a picture of a cell or a picture of cells, that this is us. Looking at the structure of cells and understanding their function, never do we think that these cells are us.
具体的大做的时候呢，我们具体的方法呢，就是先把这些理论学好然后呢多看一下这些人体的结构它的这些细胞，然后细胞的结构全部了解一下。这个之前我们不是说闻思修吗？闻和思考通过听闻和思考就把这些全部了解好。了解了以后呢，我们开始大做去思考那我身上这个40万亿或者是60万亿的这个细胞就构成了今天的我除了这个以外没有别的。那这些40万亿或者60万亿的细胞看起来就像一个整体的东西，但根本不是一个整体，它们各是各的各是各的就是比如说我们 10万个人聚在一起啊，那么这个就叫做人群，但实际上都是个体的，这里没有一个叫群体这样的，群体就是一种抽象的概念啊，实际上真实存在的具体的就是生命的这个个体啊，同样的身体啊，就是一种这个抽象的观念，然后具体的应该说是这个细胞啊，当然如果细胞再分析的话，细胞也不是真实的，但是我们不用再往下分啊，细胞就作为我们人体的最小的单位啊，这样观察的时候呢，我们就会发现这个身体肉体上面呢，确实除了这些东西以外，没有我了啊。但如果这个我们刚才讲了比如说细胞，我们去看一下它的这个结构这个是不是我呢？这个我刚才讲过，根本是不可能的。如果让我们知道如果让我们去想这个图片上的这个细胞是我，那我们永远都没办法接受那这些都不接受了，那么你的我在哪里然后我们也找不出来，说不出来。
So in this analytical contemplation, what we first need to do is to understand the theory behind it. So we need to get a good understanding of the physical structure of the body, and particularly cells and their structure. So when we talk about listening, contemplating, and meditating, the first of these things, listening and contemplating, we need to get an understanding of these things, and then we actually need to sit down and contemplate it. If, I'm going to say for convenience, 40 to 60 trillion cells comprise our current body, then what are we aside from these cells? Even though it seems as if we are a whole, in actual fact we're made up of nothing more than trillions of individual separate cells. It's just the same logic as 100,000 people together are referred to as a crowd, but in actual fact a crowd is an abstract concept. There's no crowd, there's only a collection of individuals. So it's the same with the body too. The idea of a whole body is an abstract concept. So cells, if we take cells as the smallest unit of our physical body, we can recognize that besides these cells that make us up, there is nothing else. We are nothing else other than these cells. And yet, when we look at the cells, we look at their structure, we look at their shape, we look what they look like, it's very difficult. We can never believe that this is me. We can never accept this. So if this is the case, if these cells are not me, then where am I?
然后我们如果再稍微详细一点的观察的话，那就比如说从10亿光年之外拍的这个宇宙的这个图片或者是我们简单的说，比如说我们晚上没有云的时候抬头一看然后这个满空都是星星就是有无数个这个亮点无数个亮点，这就是这个无数的天体。然后呢，用显微镜看我们的身体最后就是跟这个拍出来的这两个照片放在一起的时候呢，我们根本就看不出哪个是宇宙的图和哪个是我们的身体的这个图片，完全是一模一样就是这个空中有无数的星星构成了这个宇宙。然后呢，宇宙也就是我们很远的地方去看的话，它也就显现出一个整体，但进去了以后呢，根本就不是一个整体。我们从现在地球上看没有一个整体，只是一个无数的星星我们的身体也是用我们的这个眼睛看，它就是一个整体的东西但是它不是一个整体的东西用显微镜看根本不是一个整体的东西。显微镜它拍的很小很小的一个这个照片，很细微的照片，跟我们刚才讲的这个我们看到的这个宇宙的照片放在一起 然后我们就是分不出哪个是我们身体的照片，哪个是我们的宇宙的照片所以呢，我们的身体就是如果细胞再往下分的话，那就是就这么一个空间当中有无数个非常非常细微的这些粒子就是无数的粒子，一大堆的粒子那么这个就更难了。那么这个无数的粒子当中哪一个是我如果说都不是我那么都不是我那么这我们的身体上除了这些以外就是没有别的东西了。
And if we take the example of the nighttime sky, the sky on a very clear night when there are countless stars across the sky. If we were to take a picture of the sky like this and then were to compare it to a picture that was made by a high-powered microscope of our bodies, then it would be very difficult to discern which was a picture of the universe or a picture of the stars at night and which was a picture of our body. In fact, they would look exactly the same. With our body, it is the case that it appears to be a whole, it appears to be one thing. However, when we look at it under the microscope, it is not. It's just made up of countless microparticles. And so if we were to divide cells even further into even smaller units, then all we would have with our bodies, all our bodies would be countless numbers of microparticles suspended in space. And at this stage, it would be even more difficult for us to answer the question, which of these particles is me? What if none of these particles of me? And so by thinking in this way, we will find it very difficult to answer this question.
比如说我们到超市去卖一袋大米然后这些大米装在一个这个口袋里，我们从口袋的外面看就是一袋米，就是它就好像是一个整体的东西但是呢拆开了以后一看这里没有一个整体，就是无数的一粒一粒的大米除了这个一粒一粒的大米以外呢，没有一个整体的那我们的身体呢完全是这样子
And it's the same if we were to go to a supermarket and buy a bag of rice. It would appear that we have bought one bag of rice and that this is a whole, but actually when we open it, we find that it is not one whole unit, but rather it is countless grains of rice. And it's exactly the same with our physical bodies too.
好，我们现在大家感受一下大作思考一下首先我们可以比如说把自己的这个右手比如说我们的身体的右手然后就看它是观察它是无数个细胞无数个细胞然后呢左手再去观察左手也是无数个细胞然后呢右腿左腿，然后就整个身体里里外外这样去观察无数个这个细胞如果再往下的话，那是有无数个这个电子在转在扰动这个原子核这是一个这样子的东西。那如果不这么深入的去思考的话，我们的这个身体全部的身体是无数的细胞这个是肯定的我们的眼睛虽然看不见，这是真实的显微镜虽然是看不到很小很小的粒子，但是呢细胞是完全是可以看得到的然后这个除了这些东西以外，我们没有这个没有别的东西。那我们去深入的去思考一下，到底这些细胞无数个细胞里面哪一个是我 如果这一个一个我们认为都不是我的话，那平时我特别执着的我特别执着的这个我那应该是在什么地方这个它到底是一种模糊的这种概念，还是一个具体的东西这样子我们去思考一下我们用5分钟的时间来思考。
So we're going to contemplate on this now. We're going to contemplate on it in the form of meditation. So everybody start off by first contemplating your right arm and contemplating your right arm as comprised of countless numbers of cells, then move on to your left arm, contemplating its nature as countless numbers of cells. And then in this way, move to your right leg and then your left leg, and then throughout the rest of your body, contemplating in this way. Some might wish to go even smaller, contemplating one's body as made up of countless electrons circling around nucleuses, but it's not necessary that we go this small. We can stay at the level of cells. Certainly our physical body is completely comprised of cells. High-powered microscopes may not be able to see smaller particles, but they can definitely perceive cells. And in fact, we are made up of nothing else besides cells. So in observing our body in this way, we can ask ourselves, if none of these cells anywhere are myself, then where is this self that I am usually so deeply attached to? And by inquiring in this way, we can ask ourselves whether our concept, whether self in fact is a concrete thing or whether it is just a blurry abstract concept.
好，现在我们大家请大家做好这个大坐的这个姿势这个我们前几天讲过了，这个姿势我们今天就不讲我们把简单的说就是现在我们因为坐在这个椅子上腿不能盘也没关系，能盘的话也可以手这样子左手放下面，右手放上面这样子。然后就放在这个肚脐下面4个手指丹田这个地方然后呢身体要端正然后呢头稍微往前低头，然后呢眼睛就往下面看往前看这样子这个保持这种姿势，然后我们全神贯注的去思考我们的先是右手，然后左手，右腿，左腿就是把它分解到细胞，然后的变成了这个细胞，我们想得很清楚了以后呢，然后在这个当中去找自我在哪里。
So everyone, please adopt the meditation postures that we talked about yesterday and the day before. Take your seats. It's not necessary to sit cross-legged, although you can if you want. Please put your hands in the meditation mudra and place your hands 4 fingers below your navel. Sit upright. And have your gaze lowered and maintain this posture. And with this posture, maintaining this posture, we now bring our contemplation into focus on our body and the different parts of our body, and then finally to the cells that comprise our body. And by observing our body in this way, we should seek to locate where is our self.
好，我们现在开始用5分钟的时间去观察，请大家静下心，全神贯注的认真的去思考，我们认真的去看一看这个自我是什么。
So everybody, we're going to spend 5 minutes now just doing this investigation, this observation to see what our self is or where in fact our self is.
好，现在开始。
We're going to begin now.
好，5分钟。
And that's 5 minutes.
好，然后我们再进一步的观察我们的这个精神，也就是意识确实我们除了肉体跟这个意识肉体是我们的阴间的部分精神意识这是我们的软件的部分，比如说一台计算机除了这2个以外是没有其他的。然后我们人也是除了这个阴间软件没有别的，这2个东西就构成了我们人。
As for our minds, our consciousnesses, these form along together with our physical bodies, comprise us as humans, just as a computer is made up of a hardware and a software component, so too are we as humans. Our physical bodies are our hardware and our consciousness is our software. It's these 2 aspects or these 2 components that comprise us as human beings.
好，现在我们也要观察一下我们的意识。平时我们很多人就觉得这个身体呢我们大家都知道人死了以后呢就回归尘土变成了这个尘土，就不是自我但是我们很多人想这个人的意识人的精神应该是自我这样子，但是意识也是一模一样的，这个就意识呢更加的玄为什么呢？就是物质的话，至少我们看得见摸得着我们的很多的感官都感受得到，但是我们的意识呢，我们的感官都感觉不到，它只有意识它自己感觉得到它的存在。所以这个就更玄。现在我们观察意识这个上面有没有一个自我的存在这个我们开始观察的时候呢，大家要站在一个客观公正这样子的这个角度去思考首先我们不要有立场，不要有任何的立场，不要有任何的成见我们通过这个观察最后得到的结论是什么就是什么客观公正的去观察。如果我们得到了这个自我的存在那就这个自我就存在了。如果没有得到或者是我们发现它不存在的，那么它就是不存在了。所以呢，我们不要开始的时候就不要有成见然后呢，最后得到的结论是什么就是什么这样子去观察这个意识，我们的意识。
As for our minds or our consciousness, well, actually our physical bodies, when our physical bodies die, they turn into dust and are believed to no longer exist. However, as for our minds are much more abstruse than our physical bodies, because our physical bodies at least can be perceived with our senses, our eyes, ears, nose, etc. However, the mind or the consciousness is only something that is able to be perceived by mind or consciousness itself. So as now we need to interrogate whether or not self exists in the mind, and we need to do this in a fair and objective way, without preconceived positions or preconceived opinions or prejudices. That is, we need to perform this interrogation in a completely objective way. If we do so and discover that self exists, then we can determine that it exists. However, if it doesn't, if we discover that it is not there or it doesn't exist, then this has to be our conclusion.
那意识我们平时叫做意识流意识流是什么意思？就像河流、电流一样，看起来从表面上看它就是一个连续性的但是 这个意识流实际上呢，它没有一个连续的东西没有连续的东西，因为我们的这个意识呢就现在当下它存在的确实是存在的意识，不是意识流这个意识流当中的一个非常非常短的一个阶段。那这个短到什么程度比如说可以把1秒钟分到1万个那这样子的话，现在存在的就是1秒钟的1/10001秒钟的1/1000，我们的意识流的1秒钟的1/1000，它现在存在。这个之前的都是过去，都已经消失了不在这个世界上，任何地方都找不到，已经不存在。然后这个1秒钟的1/1000的之后的都叫做未来，都没有诞生没有出生，没有出现没有出现等于就是根本就不存在，它将来会出现，但是呢，现在从站在现在的这个角度去思考，那它也是不存在的。那么唯一存在的唯一存在的就是这个1秒钟的1/1000然后它的这个生和灭的时间很快，这个速度很快，我们看起来就像一个连续的东西，但是这里没有连续的东西。
So when we talk about the mind, we often talk about the mind stream, this idea of a stream or a current, an electric current or a river current. Even though it appears on the surface, however, that our mind is a continuum or a stream, in actual fact it isn't. That is the only sense in which our mind exists is in this very moment, in this very moment. And this is an extremely short fraction of time. In fact, it is so short that we can divide the period of time for which the mind truly exists into 1/10,000th of a minute. This is the fraction of time that the mind is truly existent for. Everything prior to this present 10,000th of a minute has already passed, therefore it belongs to the past. Everything that will occur subsequent to this current 10,000th of a minute has not yet occurred, it has not yet arisen, and so it belongs to the future. So the only sense in which mind exists is now, in the current moment, in the current 1/10,000th of a minute. So this is this arising and ceasing of mind is extremely rapid.
简单的说我们的万事万物都跟这个时间有关系也就是说，时间就是我们的万事万物的变化的过程除了这个变化过程以外呢，也没有时间这两个实际上就是用我们的意识把物质的变化和时间分开，我们的意识可以这么去想，但是实际上这物质的变化以外就是没有时间。那凡是跟时间有关系的这些万事万物，它的存在的方式都是这样子。比如说我们今天这个时间24小时我们当作现在那么这样子的话，明天以后的都叫做未来昨天以前的都叫做过去那么今天的这个24小时当作现在，那么它是存在的今天是存在的。然后呢，昨天因为它是过去，过去的东西去哪儿呢它是不存在，它已经消失了，它发生了，它曾经发生过，但是呢它现在已经不存在现在已经消失了，它不在任何地方，它已经消失了。然后未来明天以后就叫做未来。那么未来它在哪里呢当然明天这个未来就变成现在了这个时候它是存在了。但是我们从今天的这个角度去思考 那未来在哪里呢？不存在不存在，它会发生，以后会发生，但是现在它不存在明天的我在哪里不存在就是这样子，它就是一个那明天不存在，只有现在当下才是存在的这样的这个时间的概念，过去未来现在，这个我们大家都比较容易理解了。好，现在我们把这个就缩小到这个1秒钟的1/1000以后呢，然后这个1秒钟的1/1000是当下，是现在，它是存在了。那么之前的都是这个过去不存在了，之后的还没有发生，也不存在，就唯一就这么一点存在。但是它现在存在，但是第二刹那的时候，第二瞬间的时候，它又消失了然后又换了另外一个东西出来，所以这个叫做意识流意识流就是不断的更新，但是这个无数的这个生灭东西诞生了一个，又毁灭了一个，这个我们的肉眼看不见就这么一个看起来像是一个连续的东西，但这里根本没有一个连续的东西那这个就是我们的意识。那现在我们这个道理明白了以后呢，然后我们要去观察那这个无数的这个意识当中，哪一个是自我哪一个是自我，那就要去这么去思考。
So all phenomenon is connected to time, and in fact all phenomenon are nothing but exist in a state of change or a process of change. And so we can take this logic and understand it from the point of a 24-hour day. And if we call our present 24 hours now, then everything, then tomorrow is in the future. Yesterday is in the past. Everything that has taken place in the past has already occurred. It's already disappeared. It no longer exists. And everything in the future, tomorrow, has not yet happened. So aside from today, there is nothing else that isn't existent. The past no longer exists, and the future has not yet happened. And so if we take this logic, which so the idea of yesterday, today, and tomorrow, this is kind of and then reduce it back down to the notion of our mind only existing for 1/10,000th of a second, then everything prior to the present 1/10,000th of a second is the past, and everything subsequent to the current 1/10,000th of a second is the future. So at this very moment, the only existing moment is now. However, because this now is extremely brief, it's such a short period of time, it rapidly disappears, and very quickly the next mind moment emerges. And so this is what we call the mind stream. But in actual fact, the mind stream is not a single continuity, but rather the mind in a constant state of updating, that there are countless motions or movements of arising and ceasing, and arising and ceasing, even though we cannot see or recognize this process of arising and ceasing. It appears to us as if it is one continuity, but in actual fact it's not. So once we understand this logic, we understand this reasoning, we need to apply it to our own minds and ask, which of these moments is me in my mind?
好，因为今天我们就是因为时间的关系没有办法深入的去讲，没有办法展开的讲但是就是关于这方面的这些课程呢这个网上有很多 大家就是进一步到时候到网上去听一听这个视频还有我们可以看这个中观的书这样子的话我们可能会更加的能够理解这些，因为今天我们时间的关系没办法讲这个讲得很清楚了，简单就是这样子，大概的思维的方式是这样子。那现在我们用5分钟的时间还有一个更简单的这个要说一下，比如说我们不想去这个思考刚才我们讲的那么的细节的话，那现在我们可以稍微简单一点，比如说我们的这个意识流就像一条河一样，那这个当中它的这个每一个的时间单位我们刚才讲的1/1这个不说，那现在比如说无数的念头比如说我们一会儿有高兴，一会儿有不高兴，然后一会儿有就想这个，一会儿有想那，这是有无数的念头，不一样的念头然后这些念头就构成了我们的意识流意识流。那么但是这些念头看起来就是意识流当中的一个成员，就是一个整体性的东西实际上呢这根本不是这比如说有个善的念头来了过去了，消失了，然后就又来了一个恶的念头然后一会儿有就开心了，一会儿不开心一会儿有想过去的，一会儿有想未来的实际上这两个不是关联比如说我去想过去的事情想完了，这个念头不存在，消失了立即就又去思考未来的东西这个就是又是一个新诞生的念头。这两个念头当中没有关系都是不一样的念头那么这些念头当中无数的念头当中哪一个是我是哪一个我们去找，然后呢如果我们发现这每一个念头都不符合是我那这样子的话那就没有我了，这些不是我的话那就没有别的意识流，这个就是意识流。
So tonight, because of limited time, I'm not able to go into greater detail with this particular contemplation. Nevertheless, there are a lot of other teachings that I've given on this available online, and so everybody could listen to these teachings or otherwise read books to gain a deeper understanding or a clearer understanding of what we've been talking about tonight. But there is perhaps a more simple method of contemplation that we can use to arrive at the same conclusion. So if we take the idea of the mind stream, so the mind, just like a river, it is comprised of countless thoughts, happy thoughts, unhappy thoughts, thoughts of all different natures, and together they make up the mind stream. And it seems that each thought is part of a constitutive part of this mind stream. But in actual fact, these various thoughts that arise, positive, negative, past, future, happy, sad, etc., they have no connection between each other. And so what we can do is we can investigate, we can analyze these thoughts, and we can ask which of these thoughts is me, which of these thoughts is myself. And if in doing this investigation we conclude that none of these thoughts is me or none of these thoughts is myself, then we have to conclude that myself does not exist in my mind stream, because aside from these thoughts, my mind stream is nothing else.
好，我们现在大家做好这个打坐的这个姿势。
So everybody, please get yourself ready with the proper body postures for meditation.
然后全神贯注的去思考我们的这个无数的这个念头当中哪一个是自我或者是除了这些以外有没有自我，我们客观公正的去观察。
And please, for the next 15 minutes, objectively contemplate of these countless thoughts that we have, which is myself? And or aside from these thoughts, where is myself?
好，我们现在开始用5分钟的时间，大家开始观察。
So we're going to begin now for 5 minutes.
好，5分钟了。
That's 5 minutes.
好，我们今天就是简单的这样子感受一下只是感受而已实际上我们还要深入的去了解然后呢深入的去学习然后呢进一步的去大做，这样子的话就会有一些新的这个体会，这一定会有的，每个人都会有的。
So today we just really gained a very initial experience or an initial feeling for this meditation. We all need to continue to deepen our understanding of these concepts, need to study further, and need to continue meditating further on non-self. And by doing so, everyone will definitely gain new understandings.
然后我们这个观察比较到位比较深入的时候，效果比较好的时候，然后我们深深的体会到这个自我真的是不存在会得到一个这样子的感受。
And when our contemplation or our investigation, our analysis reaches a relatively advanced point, then we will gain a very tangible feeling or tangible experience of the lack of self.
然后我们就是找到了一个这样子的感觉的时候那这个就是我们需要的结果，就是这个前面的我们的这种各种各样的这个思考思维这个是过程只是过程而已。那通过这个过程最后得到的结果结果就是我们深深的体会到自我不存在，而且这个不是告诉自己不是我们就是要去这么去想而是通过这个逻辑的观察，最后就是非常清楚的感觉到它的不存在那找到了这种感觉的时候，这个就是叫做无我。然后找到了这种感觉以后呢，然后我们就停留在这个感觉当中。开始的时候可能最多也就1分钟半分钟2分钟已经很不错这样子开始的时候就只能停留这么短但是没问题的，这个会越来越好的那么我们需要的就是这种无我的这种感觉而不是前面的这些思考。但是没有这些思考没有这些观察，就不会有这个结果。所以呢，前面的都是过程或者是方法后面的深深的体会到自我不存在，那就是得到了这个结果。如果我们一直都没有这种结果的话，那这个我们的思维还不行还没有对，反复的思考找到了这种感觉为止然后就停留在这个当中2分钟1分钟，如果是能够停留1分钟的话，那这个叫做我们修了1分钟的无我如果我们能够停留2分钟那么可以说我们修了2分钟的无我，2分钟的空心可以这么讲。
So through performing this contemplation, this investigation, we aim to achieve a feeling of no self, an experiential feeling of no self. So this feeling, this sense of no self is the result that we aim for through this meditation. The contemplation, the thinking, the investigation that we do throughout the meditation is the process. It's not the result. The result is the sense or the feeling of no self. And when we arrive at this feeling of a lack of real existence of self, then this is something that it's not convincing ourselves, it's not telling ourselves that this is the case. This is a true sense or feeling that we arrive at through doing this meditation. And when we have this feeling, when we have this sense, then we should abide in this state or in this feeling for 1 minute, or 2 minutes, even 30 seconds. To begin with, 1 minute is also is very good. Increasingly, we'll get longer in terms of the time we can abide in this state. So the aim of this meditation is this feeling of no self. It's not to contemplate. The contemplation is only a process. However, without the process, without the contemplation, then we don't arrive at this result. And if you find that in meditating in this way, you just don't reach this result, you don't have this feeling of no self, then keep contemplating, keep doing it over and over until you do. And when you do arrive at this feeling, then abide in this state, rest there for a few minutes or so. If you can rest in this state for 1 minute, then you can say that you have practiced 1 minute of meditation on no self. If you can rest there for 2 minutes, you can say that you've meditated for 2 minutes on no self or on emptiness.
这个时候啊，有些人呢会感到恐惧就是害怕为什么呢？我们这个之前一直都就认为有一个自我的存在，那么现在突然间发现找不到它不知道自己是什么这样子的时候呢，就会害怕但是没关系这个害怕呢，这个恐惧呢是一件好事佛经里面都讲了，为什么是好事呢？这个就是说明我们的思考就是比较深入如果是这个我们的思维不深入的话，连这个都不会有的。所以呢这个不用害怕。为什么？实际上我们本来就是这样子，实际上你发现了这个不会发生任何的变化，本来就是这样子说这个变化是我们的观念上的变化，实际上我们的身体我们的这个意识那本来就这样子，我们没有发现之前也是这样，之后虽然是发现了，但是呢它也不会有什么变化照样的就是这样子去生活，这样工作，不会有什么这个身体精神上的变化。变化是我们的观念的变化然后观念上有了这个变化，然后呢我们可以消除很多的烦恼我们刚才前面讲的这些全部烦恼从此以后就不会产生但是这个身体不可能因为我们发现了它就会消失，这个也不可能我们的意识流我们发现它是我就从此就停止，也不可能，都不可能，它照样的会继续下去。但是我们的观念有很大的变化就是这个变化，所以如果感觉有点恐惧的话是没问题，这是好事。
Some people, when they gain this feeling that the self doesn't exist, they give rise to a feeling of fear. All of a sudden, this self that they thought exists, when they can't find it, they feel extremely scared. But don't worry, this fear in fact is a good thing. In fact, it says in the scriptures that this fear arises, or this fear comes about when our thinking, when our contemplation is effective, when it's deep, because if this weren't the case, then we wouldn't give rise to this kind of feeling. In any case, there's no need for fear, because this discovery of the lack of self is just the way things in fact are. Discovering it doesn't make any change. We've only discovered what is and has always already been the case. The change that takes, and discovering this doesn't lead to any change, at least not any change in our minds or in our bodies. The change that does take place is an change in attitude. So we can continue to lead our lives as normal, lead our working lives and everyday lives as normal. There's no change in our bodies and our minds, but there is a change in our attitude, and it's this change in attitude which enables us to eliminate affliction so that it will no longer arise. It's not the case, however, that through discovering that there's no self in the physical body, that the body disappears, or by failing to locate self in the mind, that the mind stream stops. All of these continue to operate more or less as normal. However, the attitude change, we do witness a change in attitude. So if you do find yourself feeling some fear when doing this meditation, it's no problem. This is a good thing.
这个时候还有一个问题呢，我们必须要了解。如果这个我们无我呀、空性啊这些没有了解好的话，就是会出现很多的矛盾啊。比如说，那么我不存在，那么谁在修啊？谁要成佛呢？谁要去学佛呢？啊，等等，这些问题都出来了。那么这个也要简单的说一下啊。那这是为了解决这个问题啊，佛教啊就讲二谛啊，二谛。那这个我们今天就没有时间讲，大家可以去学习。简单的是我们前几天讲过了，比如说这朵花它本来是没有颜色啊，实际上是没有颜色，但是我们的眼睛看是有颜色，这两个不矛盾啊。我们知道了它是没有颜色。但是呢，我们虽然是明白了，但是我们凡是用我们的眼睛看，它永远都是有颜色的但是我们的意识之前呢，对这个颜色很有执着，我们认为这朵花是有颜色那后来就知道不是它的颜色，而是我自己大脑里面的画面。这样子以后呢，我们的观念有所转变但是花只要用我的眼睛看，它永远都是这样子，没有什么变化观念有转变，就是这样子。所以我们在这个观察的时候，我们发现了它的真相，真相是没有自我的，不存在的然后呢，用我们的感官看的话，那当然了，我人在这里怎么可能不存在呢然后呢，现实生活当中人存在的那这两个是不矛盾。那么前者就是说无我是真相，它的真实情况就是这朵花没有颜色一样。然后有我的存在那它的现象不是它的真实的情况，就像这朵花在我们的眼里有颜色一样，这两个不矛盾的。
There's one point, though, that everybody needs to understand about no self and emptiness, because if these concepts are not understood properly, then many people will give rise to contradictory thoughts or conflictive thoughts in their minds. That is, they'll ask questions like, well, if I don't exist, then who is practicing this meditation right now? Or if I don't exist, if the self doesn't exist, then who achieves Buddhahood? And it was in order to address this issue that the Buddha expounded the notion of the two truths. So we can understand this in terms of this flower. This flower we know has no inherent color, and yet when we look at it with our naked eye, it appears to have a color. There's no contradiction between these two states. That is, our eyes see a color. So once we realize that there is no inherent color on the flower or in the flower, then even though our eyes perceive it to be colored, our mind does not feel so attached. Prior to understanding this, our minds felt very attached to the color, but subsequently they cease to do so. So we can see in this situation that what changes when we understand that the flower is not any particular color is a change in our attitude. But when we look at the flower with our naked eye, it will always appear to be a particular color, and there's no conflict between these two states. And so it is too with our investigation of no self. The truth of the matter is that there is no self. However, when we use our senses or our sensory faculties to evaluate things, then our person is here, it seems to be here, and in our everyday life our self exists. And so there is no contradiction between these two states, the conventional existence of the self but the ultimate non-existence of self.
这个当中呢，我们还需要学习的和还要了解的就比较多，所以就是希望大家进一步的去关注一下这个空心佛教的空心其实这个是佛教里面最有意义的然后呢，这个我们明白了以后，真的是明白了这个世界的真相然后以及我们自己的生命的真相。自我的真相，这些全部真相明白了，真相明白了以后呢，然后就是我们这个就是这些烦恼就是因为我们不明白这个真相，所以产生了那么多的烦恼。这些烦恼呢全部都可以消除，是非常有意思的。有些时候呢，我们为了解决一些现实中的烦恼去观察这个无我，修一修这个无我，确实是有一定的帮助大家到时候感受一下就一定会有亲身经历这个非常重要。好，我们今天时间有点超过了，今天的这个课就讲到这里。
These concepts, though, require more study on our part. So I hope that everyone really pays a lot of attention to emptiness. It really is the most meaningful aspect of Buddhism. Through understanding emptiness, through realizing emptiness, then we can understand not only the truth of the world, but also of life and also of self. And through doing so, it is possible for us to eliminate all of our afflictions. Tonight we have gone a little over time with the teaching, and so we will bring things to a conclusion here.
好，我们现在大家一起做回向。
So we're going to end now with a dedication of merit together.
Sonam de damja zamba nyan to ne ni be dana ba je ja ji ga na je ba lo zhe ba zhe bin zo le zhou a zhou er xiu om a hong ban zhen ge zhe ba ma se de hong om a hong ban zhen ge zhe ba ma se de hong om a hong ban zhen ge zhe ba ma se de hong 谢谢大家，阿弥陀佛，扎西德勒。